I'm Andy Johnson. I'm one of the members of ILEC International Literacy Educators Coalition, and we have some wonderful people here, and I'm just going to get out of the way and let them introduce yourself. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Edgar Lampkin. I am the CEO for CABE, and I'm here with a incredible team that is going to share with you this workshop, Pushing Back Against Science of Reading Mandates, the California story. I have with us Dr. Barbara Flores from California State University, San Bernardino, who has trained over 10,000 teachers, bilingual teachers in bilingual education and bilingual pedagogy and biliteracy, along with Dr. Esteban Díaz, who is also from California State University, San Bernardino. And we also have the pleasure of having another incredible researcher in biliteracy, and that is Dr. Jill Kerper Mora from San Diego State University. And so without further ado, we're going to continue to plug away. We want to thank International Literacy Educators Coalition, ILEC, for giving us the opportunity to share this webinar, and we hope the information will be helpful for you. What I would like to do first is to begin by sharing with you a little bit about what CABE is and what we do so that you can understand how this whole story evolved. So in CABE, we have a vision and a mission that focuses on advocating for bilingual and multilingual education, equity, advocacy for our English language learners, or as we also know them, emergent bilingual learners. And our tradition of advocacy for multilingual learners has been around for quite a number of decades. As a matter of fact, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary at our CABE conference this year. And our focus and support is on equity and language rights. We saw this legislation that became, and we felt was a threat to our multilingual learners, and as well as our teachers in California that work with our diverse culturally and linguistic learners. And so we felt it was important to realize and acknowledge, as we started to take a look at this situation, that the tremendous work that had been put together on our existing comprehensive and robust California English language arts and English language development framework was in opposition to the adherence of this singular research paradigm that the science of reading was coming from. And so it was due to that we began to look at pushing back. As we began to look at pushing back, we took a look at a couple of questions that we felt were important in order to be able to share the story. One is, what are some generalizable strategies based on what we share with you that you may be able to take with you based on the history of the successful work we did on blocking the proposed AB 2222 Science of Reading legislation in California? And two, how does this experience with education advocacy organizations effectively represent issues and helps us to address those concerns of our multilingual constituents regarding the proposed legislation? So defeating AB 22 Rubio, the Science of Reading bill, I can begin by sharing with you that it started off in the Assembly as a proposed bill. Due to the help and the support from our lobbyists, we were able to have access to that bill prior to it even going to a hearing, which then gave us an opportunity to begin to take a look at it and dissect it. And what we noticed was that AB 2222 proposed to impose mandates that required adherence to those mandates, and that it was also focusing on one science, the science of reading, instead of the sciences of reading, that we knew were embedded in our ELA/ELD framework, as well as the English language development research and sciences that have been done. So to continue, it also continued to impose a conservative agenda from ALEC, which is known as the American Legislative Exchange Council, which we realized was tied to the Heritage Foundation. And again, these are conservative organizations that tend to really push conservative agendas in our country, in the United States, throughout the United States. Also, AB 2222 proposed to open doors to give publishers that promoted their material a competitive edge over all the other publishers. And that was also a concern for us. Lexia being one of the big major companies, but you also have many others like Amplify, 95%, Core Learning, etc. And so with the goal of undermining and superseding and neglecting California ELA/ELD frameworks integration and the 5 organizing themes that are in our framework, like foundational skills, language development, meaning making, content knowledge, and effective expression. And so the undermining of this was a big major concern because we knew it was not going to meet the needs of our students that need different types of supports in order to be able to help them with the development of literacy and the development of language. And as you can see here in this slide that is coming up, this is just a visual of the picture that paints what I just shared with all of you. The conservative agenda being that reading is fundamental to American liberties, influenced and evident in a white paper by ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, that then was the vehicle that propelled and supported the Reading League in trying to push the science of reading. And again, how it went in contradiction with the 5 pillars of early literacy, as well as our ELA/ELD framework, which you see on the right-hand side. This ELA/ELD framework was developed by the California Department of Education with 40 researchers that were very well known in literacy and language development. So that battle of literacy took place amongst these 40 researchers, and it took some time for them to really come up with a powerful, comprehensive resource, which we know as the ELA/ELD framework on how to teach literacy and language for our culturally and linguistically diverse students. So I shared with you that this California ELA/ELD framework is comprehensive, it's robust, and it is also focused on making sure that there's equity, that effective language and literacy instruction is provided for all of our linguistically diverse students. In addition to that, I share with you that there were scholars that came together and met at the State Board of Education to develop this comprehensive document. So, as we began to see the challenges, we began to work on a number of areas: political networking, engaging in dialogue and dissecting the proposed bill, and then beginning to also engage and work with constituent groups, and then eventually engaging in that dialogue with our assembly members and sharing with them the concerns that were there. And you're going to hear more about the details of how this unfolded as we begin to take a look at what were those next steps. Last thing that I want to highlight is that CABE, again, as we began to engage with and dialogue with our constituent groups, more and more organizations came on board with the understanding of the challenges that were there in regards to some of these mandates and why they were not necessarily going to meet the best interest of our students. Ultimately, I think the biggest organization in California that came on board that really took it to that next level was our California Teachers Association. Once we ended up having the California Teachers Association coming on board, more and more organizations, and the list is right there for you to take a look at, started to come on board and again write their own letters of concern, began to highlight some of the language that was imposing and made suggestions and recommendations. These are all of the different organizations that eventually jumped on board with us in this work. So having said that, obviously that involved some legislative advocacy work where we had to go to the assembly and testify and share what those concerns were. But by that time, we had a lot of legwork that had been done, which you're going to get a chance to hear. We did some videos, recording webinars that also attempted to help people understand by debunking the science of reading through a number of different areas that they're claiming as being evidence-based to support the work they're doing. And so we had to debunk some of that. In this particular case, I'm sharing with you the neuroscience claims that were debunked through that webinar. Then we had fact-checking the science of reading that, thanks to the help of Dr. Robert J. Tierney and Dr. P. David Pearson, was extremely helpful in highlighting what are some of those claims. And you're going to get a chance to hear a little bit of that as we have Dr. Kerper Mora share with you some of those debunking needs that are there. And ultimately, unlocking reading success for culturally and linguistically diverse learners with Joe Guzman, who did an incredible job of helping us understand how principles, policies, procedures, and practices impact and affect the work that we do for culturally and linguistically diverse learners. I also was involved in putting some videos together to debunk the crises that was generated to make it seem like our students are failing. And this crisis that was generated, again, was an attempt to be able to get people on board with supporting AB 2222. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Flores, who now is going to take over and share with you a little bit about the opposition letters that took place and the power behind these opposition letters. So Dr. Flores, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Edgar. Before I start, though, I want to also give a little bit of background about the California Association for Bilingual Education. As Edgar said, we've been advocates for about 5 decades. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary that we've hired a lobbyist for 35 years. So we are known in Sacramento, in our state capital, and we have developed a very solid reputation. And so because we had lobbyists and also CABE internally from the board, our CABE board, we have members that are on the legislative committee. And I was a member on the committee, but I also was past president for 4 years, president-elect 1 year, 2 years president, and the past year was past president. I also was a member selected for the ELA, ELD framework. I competed with over 100 people, and I was one of the 40 that was selected. And we also had practitioners, administrators, as well as researchers. And we have been developing this comprehensive ELA, ELD framework for 10 years and upgrading it throughout those 10 years with current research, effective practices, et cetera, and developing resources. So once we got wind of the bill, before it goes to committee, we are given an opportunity to weigh in. And so our lobbyists notified us, and Edgar asked Esteban, Jill, and myself to look at the bill. We had a day and a half to look at it and dissect it and come up with talking points. So our lobbyists needed it, by the end of the day on a Friday. And so we did that and provided her the talking points and also the opposition components, which I will share right now. So these are the ones that were the main ones. Misuse of reading achievement test scores was one of the primary ones. The science of reading research on multilingual learners' language and literacy development was inconsistent. They misinterpreted oral language development. They also they had disrespect for teacher agency by mandating one-size-fits-all method. Another component was mandatory science of reading professional development, mainly, wanting letters for every single teacher in the state of California. Also, narrow teacher preparation and program accreditation was in there that we opposed. And then, of course, restriction of materials selected, processes and options. We have a very powerful vetting system in California. They wanted to eliminate that and just impose their own materials. And then lastly, it clearly undermined our California State Board of Education ELA, ELD framework. And so now I would like to ask Esteban, Dr. Diaz, to talk about the first one, misuse of reading achievement test scores.
Well, this triggered an immediate response on my part, because when something begins with a way that they are going to solve the problem that you have, you begin to become suspicious. And AB 2222 attempts to manufacture a crisis based on California's performance on reading scores. This is similar to what David Berliner and Bruce Biddle addressed in the manufactured crisis, which they wrote to counter the attack that conservative groups made on public schools and teachers and students. They wound up presenting absolutely strong evidence that students were actually doing pretty well. And we believe that our students are doing pretty well overall. There is no denying that they can improve, as everybody can, but the crisis is not real. Even recently, Catherine Snow was asked at a podcast that was sponsored by Amplify about the SOR movement. And she was asked, what does she think about the crisis that the SOR movement is trying to address. And her response was, as you can see there, as far as I can tell, there's no basis for assuming there is a crisis. Reading scores are on average pretty much where they were 20 years ago. I mean, a very small increment in NAEP over 20 years and in NAEP reading scores, except for the dip associated with COVID, which you can attribute not to poor reading instruction, but to the absence of reading instruction that was brought about from COVID. And AB 22 tried to make similar claims about California students because the scores were low, but we consider those to be the kind of exaggeration that was addressed by Berliner and Biddle. Admittedly, the scores are low for our diverse students, but we must heed the words that I found very helpful, that Bobby Cabuto, who was the chair of the NCTE Standing Committee on Literacy Assessment, she said that these tests measure racial and linguistic inequalities among students of color by ignoring their complex and social and linguistic contexts. We got to keep that in mind. Further, Robert Sternberg in Rethinking Schools says standardized test approaches provide the fewest opportunities for improved educational practice because it does not provide information about the learning processes necessary for designing instruction to overcome the learning problem. AB 2222 offers no useful solution to the educational and social inequities of Latinos and other students of color, but instead seeks to undermine the gains made by California's investment in standards, framework, and resources, and seeks to impose a one-size-fits-all SOR solution that does nothing but, in my mind, compound injustice. Back to Barbara.
I want to state that CABE was the first one out the gate to provide an opposition letter. And once we were heard loud and clear. And we want you to know too that that Rubio had a webinar with us, had a Zoom call with us and wanted to know how we could tweak the bill. And we said, no, we're opposed to it, period. And so then all of our coalition partners started falling into line and became aware of all these issues. So here is the coalition letter had a number of the opposition points. So I'm going to share some of them with you. And one of the blatant ones, of course, was one size fits all approach doesn't work. And I'll just read the first sentence. AB 2222 is flawed because it assumes all students learn in the same way. And in defining what science of reading is not, while requiring adherence to what is proposed, it limits the flexibility of teachers. And so this limiting flexibility, of course, creates problems, right, for our children and for our teachers. So that was one of the coalition opposition points that we had put up. The next one was that it exacerbates literacy disparities within multilingual communities. The science of reading, as defined in the bill, does not meet the needs of California's 1.1 million English learners, a group that comprises 20% of the student population. So we definitely were very critical because the bill was not culturally responsive, didn't address development of biliteracy or even second language acquisition. So that was one of the statements. The next one was on professional development should be determined based on local needs. In California, we have a tradition. I was a school board member for 12 years. We would have to negotiate related to every school district, every school board would have to negotiate with the union because they did not want a one-size-fits-all professional development. It was based on each site and, it depends on the needs of the teachers and the kids. So definitely that was one of the opposition points as well. The next one was on, of course, all of our coalition, we've worked so hard collaboratively, to develop the California English Language Arts, English Language Development Framework to serve, our students and support our teachers to guide for literacy and biliteracy. Our superintendent, Thurman, State Superintendent of Education, developed an initiative for literacy and biliteracy. And so it's embedded in all of that into the framework in the development of it. The next, go back, I'm sorry. We also pass a Proposition 58 that now went reversed Proposition 227 that banned bilingual education. And in 216, Prop 58 now provided that we could go ahead and develop bilingual dual language education throughout the state of California, as well as in 2017, the legislature adopted the English language roadmap policy, where every school district who has English learners has to follow, well, it's a roadmap, right? And how to develop effective instructional practices and policies. Thank you, Edgar. The next one. And then the next to the last one, this is it. The California, we keep saying this, but the California ELA and ELD framework should continue to serve as our guide for literacy. We want that to be it. It's policy, but it's unfunded policy. So our coalition has called upon the legislature to begin funding it. And in fact, the governor has proposed at $1.8 billion to develop our framework. That's not in the slide, but it just came out the other day. Now, I don't know if we're still going to do that because of the fires that we've had, but anyway, that was what he stated. And now, is there another one, Edgar,
Yes.
or is it the last one?
Yeah, advance one more, Edgar.
One more?
Yeah, there.
So we have 312,000 teachers, credentialed teachers in the state of California. When CTA came on board and wrote their own 5 or 6 page letter, that was the nail on the coffin for the bill. It didn't even get out of committee. And what did they project? What we talked about, the disrespect for teacher agency and, for the flexibility to adapt teaching strategies based on student needs, interests, and content. So, that's the power, you guys. That's the power of the coalitions that we formed. And knowing also the bill adoption process and how we can impact it as it moves along or doesn't move along. In this case, it didn't move along. And now Jill is going to share with us a couple of things. Well, first, another aspect of other things that we adopted, but mostly aspects of the bill that we oppose, so that you can see the language that was used. It was just, oh my God, it was draconian language. So Jill, I pass it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. First of all, we need to consider the fact that our ELA-ELD framework is one document among a compendium of documents that frame the curriculum for California. And that includes the Common Core en Español, which is the linguistic augmentation of the Common Core language arts standards that guides biliteracy instruction. And also the ELD and Spanish language development standards, which go in tandem for biliteracy programs and for ELD programs. But it's important to remember that all of these documents have their own research base, and it's not limited to any one scientific paradigm. As a matter of fact, the Common Core en Español is heavily based in metalinguistic instruction, metalinguistic research, and also in second language acquisition, and also Spanish literacy as it is taught to monolingual students in Spanish-speaking countries, which is the basis for all literacy instruction because it's language specific. So therefore, on the next slide, we're going to see how the language of the bill, Edgar, yeah, there we go. The language of the bill was very problematic because they used the words alignment with and adherence to 30, 40 times in the bill. And when you think about the concept of alignment to research, you have to ask, what does that really mean? And what we realize is that you cannot adhere to a body of research because it's thousands of studies and some of them are contradictory. So an alignment with a science of reading, which is only one of the 4 language arts, right? Speaking, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, is really talking about adherence to someone's interpretation of the research. Now, whose interpretation? That is the key question, because there is no straight line between research and pedagogy. And a policy that tries to impose a body of research as a regulatory schema is not going to succeed. Because basically it is, as we've been saying, a one size fits all. It's the assumption that one body of research covers the characteristics, the learning needs of every population. So let's look at what the bill itself said. It attempted to define, well, it did define the science of reading. And look closely at number 5. Does not rely on any model for teaching word reading based on meaning, structure, and syntax, and visual cues, including a 3 cueing approach. And then there's an exception, except for children who are suffering from deafness or who are hard of hearing. Okay, a model of teaching reading is a metaphor for a theory about pedagogy. And every teacher who teaches has a theoretical orientation to understand how children learn to read. And that is the basis of his or her decision-making in the classroom about methods. And also a 3 cueing approach. Now, the question I asked myself was, are they objecting to the number 3? They think there's only one cueing system? Or is it that they're complaining that there are only 3? Because actually there are 5 or 6 subsystems of language. So we're going to look at that as the key question, because this language made this law uninterpretable and unenforceable. Because basically you cannot enforce a law that is so vague and so hard to interpret that people cannot know when they are running afoul of the law and might get penalized for not obeying it, right? Okay, so in the next slide, I wanted to show you that as the result of our presentation at the California Council on Teacher Education, we wrote a monograph that explains how the law was analyzed, how we involved the different organizations, and it also gives the research base for the linkage between research, policy, and practice. And that's where it's really important to realize that the terms like evidence-based literacy instruction. We cannot determine what that means if we don't know what evidence comes from the research that is pertinent and relevant to the population we're teaching, right? So this brings out one aspect of research that is crucial, and that is what we call population validity. Do these research studies apply to multilingual learners? And we'll look at the different range of research that we have available to answer those questions. So to ask teachers, educators, curriculum writers, publishers to adhere to a single framework for research is not realistic. Instead, we need to go back to that compendium of documents and see how the standards themselves are research-based. And they give teachers a description of the outcomes they're looking for in instruction. And therefore, they're interpretable by teachers so that they can decide what strategies and approaches are best for achieving those outcomes with their students. Okay, so look at this law, this evidence-based literacy instruction description that was in the law, and see again the language about how it adheres to the science of reading. And then it sort of mentions, by the way, oh yes, limited English proficient pupils, English language development, et cetera, but it does not portray evidence-based ELD instruction. It's focusing more on literacy and definitely on reading, because in some cases they don't even define literacy as including writing. Okay, so in the next slide, let's look at the federal law's definition of evidence-based. And you will notice statistically significant effects from at least one well-designed and well-implemented experimental study, or moderate evidence from a well-designed, well-implemented quasi-experimental study, or at least one well-designed and well-implemented correlational study. All right, so that's a pretty easy standard for most strategies to pass, right? And I remember my dear colleague Dick Ellington saying, remember the premise about strategies. Everything works somewhere, but nothing works everywhere. Okay, the next slide shows us how we involved teacher educators. And I think that CABE can take credit for waking them up, waking us up to the consequences of this bill and the implications. Because in October of 2021, the state Senate had passed a bill that said that teacher credentialing programs need to focus on reading instruction that is aligned to the current English language arts, English language development framework. All right. It said nothing about the research base of this pedagogy. So why bring in a new law that would supersede this law that required teacher ed programs to be focusing on those standards? Okay, the next slide. Okay, so one of the battles we had to fight was when these three organizations, Decoding Dyslexia, California Reading Coalition, and the Families in Schools, wrote a letter to the Commission on Accreditation complaining about the accreditation of Mills College at Northeastern University's teacher credential program. And you can read what they had to say in this complaint. They were saying that, oh my God, their syllabi cited guided reading, level text, running records, recueing, and balanced literacy. And they said these are two practices aligned to a disproven theory of how reading acquisition develops. Whose disproven theory? How do you disprove a theory. And please, for God's sake, we as researchers expect to see citations if you're going to say that somebody's theory has been discredited or disproven. We knew exactly who they were talking about, but we won't mention it until in a few minutes. And then they considered themselves qualified to say that the research base for their the textbooks that were being cited in the syllabi of these faculty members was misaligned to current research. Now, I would be very reluctant myself as a researcher to ever say that any of these practices was misaligned with research, knowing the research base from which they come, right? And then to top it all off, they said because the science of reading does not match with the philosophy of authors X and Y, this text is not recommended. Okay, so these organizations were calling for philosophical alignment with the science of reading. Now, my understanding is that science is philosophy neutral. So how can it be that the science of reading has a philosophy to which textbook writers should adhere, right? Okay, the next slide. So let's look at the truth about cueing, because that has been the great boogeyman scapegoat for the science of reading. Cueing is what language does. And language does that through its multiple subsystems: phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. And you can even divide phonology into phonemics and phonetics, right? And next, the alphabet is a cueing system. It is a 26-symbol cueing system. And the challenge it has in English is that there are 44 phonemes that have to be represented somehow with 26 symbols. And so it gets complicated, right? And next, teachers use questioning and verbal protocols to make students aware of how language works, how language conveys meaning through these cueing subsystems. And that is called metalinguistic awareness instruction. Anywhere you see the word awareness, you're teaching metalinguistics. You're teaching how the language, or the languages in the case of biliteracy, how they work. All right. So the conclusion from this is, when you think about what cueing really is, next, that the science of reading advocates who seek to mandate bans on cueing have a quarrel with language itself, not with their research colleagues, not with their teachers. Those of us who rely on psycholinguistic research understand that the 3 in 3 cueing comes from the 3 categories of miscues that were identified in oral language performance. And that's been morphed into a straw man of an approach which doesn't exist. All right. So what I have offered is a metaphor for our research, and especially the knowledge base for multilingual educators, which is transdisciplinary. That means that we're not limiting it to one discipline of research. It transcends and includes multiple sources of research. And that includes first language and second language literacy pedagogy, like I mentioned, from Spanish-speaking countries for biliteracy learners, and of course, English for the English-speaking world. But we also have the field of second language reading. And second language reading is a phenomenon unto itself. It has a body of research that supports the way children acquire a language that they are not proficient in at a native speaker level, because there are different variables involved. And one of those is transfer, cross-linguistic transfer. So there is a body of research about cross-linguistic transfer and cross-linguistic transfer facilitation in terms of the way to support that transfer so that it enhances the learning of literacy in a second language. And of course, the neuroscience research. And that includes multiple studies, much knowledge that we've acquired about the bilingual brain and how the bilingual brain has stores and has different pathways for linking the two languages when during reading and writing and speaking. And therefore, we don't want anyone meddling with our watershed, our ecology, an ecosystem of research by limiting us or trying to take us back to the 20th century now that we're in the 21st century, to the body of research that is called science of reading, but that does not necessarily include or respect the research we have from the science of language, right? So, Edgar, here we have Professor Marie Clay's own words when she was president of the International Reading Association, now the International Literacy Association. And she put in her statement as president her complaint against the reading war. She said, this is unfortunate because we have gurus and villains being created, okay? Miscue analysis, cueing is now a villain. And so are the researchers who studied it and documented it. And we have gurus. We won't name any because they're respected colleagues. We listen to them, but they are not the be-all and end-all of the research that is available. So I ask you, from Emily Hanford's critique of Marie Clay and her claims that her theories have been discredited, who is the one who is being sold a story here, right? Is it really literacy educators, or is it literacy researchers and publishers, et cetera, who are being asked to adhere to a singular discipline framework for research? So I invite you to go to my Mora Modules website at moramodules.com. Go to the news tab and you can click there and you can find that I have done a comprehensive critique of the science of reading. And in particular, please go to the my adaptation of the fact checking from Tierney and Pearson from the perspective of a multilingual educator. Especially claim 5, which is the 3 cueing systems. And my advice based on this analysis is don't jump on the science of reading bandwagon. So Edgar, would you like to talk about our fact-checking resources?
Sure, yes. In our CABE website, you can also go to take a look and listen to some of our webinars, some of our resources that we've pulled together to support the debunking of the science of reading. In addition to that, in the chat, I included access to the ELA, ELD framework from California and all of the different resources that are there and that are available so that you have an opportunity to see how comprehensive and robust this work is and why we need to continue to focus on implementation of the ELA, ELD framework in California, thanks to the 40 researchers that came together from the different fields of the phonics and the, whole language battle that has existed for many decades. And they hashed it out and actually came up with an incredible document that we need to continue to look at implementing so that we can meet the needs of our students. Jill, turn it back to you.
Yes. So the link to my website is moramodules.com. Very easy to remember. So please go to these resources. They're free access. I would love to hear your feedback and impressions. And I want to thank my colleagues from CABE because I think their leadership, our leadership, and our activism and our advocacy has made a big difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have put the link there on the chat for you to be able to access it. If you wish to contact us, this is our email. And at this point, Andrew, we'll turn it back over to you. I know there may be some questions. We have about 10 minutes to be able to do that. So, Andrew.
Very good. Thank you. And I can say those resources, I've seen them. They're just incredible. So thank you for putting that up there. I will open this up. If you have a question or a comment you'd like to make, please put it either in the chat or in the question and answer, and we'll field them at this time. Thank you for your work in webinar. Absolutely. This was very good. Yes. Okay, we have a question here. Any way to access this webinar after the fact? Yes, I will be sending out this webinar, recording of it, to all registrants after later tonight. Do we have any questions for our panelists or comments? Okay, thanks for your commitment and time. Absolutely. Save the chat. Okay, I'll remember to save the chat. Questions or comments? Questions or comments? Thanks a million. Yes. Incredible.
Well, I wonder if anything, if our panelists have anything that they would like to say that they might have missed. Barbara, Esteban?
Well, there are some questions that have come up. And one of those is, do you expect the bill to be raised again? And of course, the answer is yes. If it's been happening in 30 plus states already, are they going to come back? Of course. Again, I want to emphasize that our intent here is not necessarily to just go against the science of reading. What we want to point out is that we have a comprehensive and robust California ELA ELD framework that we started to implement, and we were starting to see some positive results. When the pandemic hit, we were not able to continue with implementation. And it was during that period of time that the Reading League and the Science of Reading supporters started to come into the picture to begin to do their work over a couple of years to try to gain the support from EL advocate organizations so that they could then begin to push for their bill. Again, CABE did not come on board, but there were other EL advocate organizations that came on board and signed on to an agreement to support the science of reading instruction. When we looked at the bill and we saw and understood and tracked the history of what's been happening all along, the more that we dug in, the more we realized. Some people, I think, mentioned follow the money and you will know where all of this comes from. And that's pretty much what we did.
Somebody asked, where does CABE's funding come from? Membership fees, grants, or events?
We provide parent engagement trainings. We also help build capacity with our parents to learn how to be a partner in their children's education. We also provide English language development, professional development training, dual language instruction, best practices, implementation, coaching support, training for our partner districts. And so that is how we generate our revenue. We also apply for grants to help support the work that we do. So we have conferences also that help support the work that we do in building capacity with our parents, with our parent educators, with our teachers, with our administrators. Last year at our CABE conference, we had 7,000 attendees that joined us. And so our organization has a 50-year reputation of doing the right work for the right purpose and in the best interest of our culturally and linguistically diverse students.
Here's a question. Thoughts on the dyslexia screener selection in California? I have concerns about equity for our EB students, especially those not in bilingual settings.
Jill, I think you're muted.
Yes, what was the question again?
Any thoughts on the dyslexia screener selection in California?
Oh, yeah. Now I have to be careful with what I say, but it is not the case that dyslexia in Spanish shows the same characteristics as dyslexia in English. And the incidence of dyslexia in Spanish are much lower than in English. So if this instrument is based on the assumption that dyslexia is the same in every language, and the children do not have sufficient proficiency in English to really be at a point where they can begin to really respond to instruction in English reading, especially at the text, in terms of text, then we need to be very skeptical of the outcomes of the screener. And this is just a sort of piece of what I call monolingual myopia when it comes to assessing students, making the assumption that they're all alike in terms of their language skills. Think, for example, that a child who only speaks Spanish in the home has phonemic awareness in that language in order to understand speech, right? But does that phonemic awareness translate directly into English? No, it does not, because English phonology is different. So we have to really question the underlying assumptions of any type of assessment.
People are asking for wisdom, pushing back when the bill is already signed into law.
Well, that's a good question for me because I've been curiously looking to see if there are any studies that show positive or non-positive results from states that have implemented science of reading legislation. That is the proof of the pudding. Let us see what they've done. And that will tell us what we can do, either support or go forward or try and find a way that is more equitable, at least from my point of view, to all of our students, not just to the ones that the legislation is targeting, as it was in this case.
Somebody asked, what are the measurable goals of the frameworks referenced here?
Yeah, I think that's referring to my comment about standards. When you look at the standards, for example, the Common Core en Español, the standard articulates what behaviors you can observe in the student that is the desired outcome of instruction. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all measurable, but they are observable. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because measurable implies some sort of assessment that generates data. But the standards are outcomes that are articulated in a way that teachers can implement. Research findings, not so much, because research findings are abstracted from so many sources and so many different studies, et cetera, and are interpreted in order to be linked to pedagogy.
Jill, this one might be for you. Are you advocating for the 3 queuing system of ELD students? Can you talk about reading recovery, which used the 3 queuing systems as a strategy and research showed gains were not sustained?
Okay. There is no such thing as a 3 queuing system in instruction. In the type of instruction you're talking about is metalinguistic awareness instruction, metalinguistic development, because metalinguistic development is how you teach how language works. So if somebody says they're using a 3 queuing strategy, that's nonsense. It just does not apply, because no linguist would ever say there are only 3 queuing systems. There are more than 3. And each one of those subsystems of language has a research base as to how it is taught, how it interacts with reading, how it's interpreted in the brain, for example, different regions of the brain. And all of that information then tells us how to teach children to pay attention to those aspects of language that convey meaning. For example, notice that the term morphology doesn't appear in the definition of the 3 queuing systems. And that's because morphology is a word level queuing system that could not be disaggregated in the observational research of miscues, because it's the word level, and you can't separate, well, he got this word because, or he miscued this word because. So I think, to be honest, the science of reading movement is going to have to back off of these bans, because they don't make sense. They're not empirically valid, and they're confusing teachers about what can be taught and what can't. And the fact is that students who are learning English as a second language and learning to read in English need that metalinguistic knowledge more than anyone else. And so it's an equity issue. These bans are working against equity.
All right, a couple more questions here. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Were there any other groups besides Decoding Dyslexia, California Reading Coalition, and Families in Schools that were lobbying for the bill? I just heard you say reading. Any others?
If I can jump in and just share with all of you that if you go to the resources that we share with you, you'll be able to see and read about where all of this is coming from. And you will be highly surprised at the history behind all of this. There was a question about, are there other bills similar to the California bill that were passed in other states? And that's a yes. Obviously, this movement has started for probably over a decade. And over that period of time, no, not over a decade, I would say close to a decade. And over that period of time, yes, the Reading League has been one of those big groups that has been involved in this movement, and they have literally been learning and growing and getting stronger in how they approach each state and how they tackle the ability to not only make mandated changes in the education code to fit and meet their needs and the publisher's needs, but also to push the movement for the science of reading. And as they continue to grow and develop and get stronger, yes, there have been some states that have just gone right along and boom, have fallen into it. Other states, there's lawsuits that are going on because of the approach and how they've taken the necessary steps to try to create this fallacy of a one size fits all, a magic bullet that's going to teach all kids to learn to read. And I want to clarify too that, we advocate for culturally and linguistically diverse students And there's different needs that are there with different opportunities to provide those supports and those services. And dyslexia students can benefit from phonetic instruction, just like many other students can, but then some other students don't learn that way. And so we have to be able to have that bag of tricks that will help us as far as best practices to be able to meet the needs of our students. And so another question that came up was the English Learner Roadmap. In California, we have what we call an English Learner Roadmap policy that was put together. And so what the thing that I want to highlight with that is it's a policy, but did not have teeth into it. As an advocacy organization, we have been able to push and support a bill, AB 2074, that will help now provide funding to the Department of Education to be able to come up with a strategic plan for full implementation of the English Learner Roadmap. What I want to say with that is when you go in there, you're going to see the California has been doing a lot of work to align all of our pieces and make sure they're founded on solid, comprehensive, and robust research. Our ELA ELD framework is aligned to the English Learner Roadmap. It's aligned to our statewide assessments for English language development and for English language arts and mathematics. Our standards are aligned to our English language arts ELD framework. And so all of this alignment that has been done over multiple years with engagement and support from many researchers. I can share with you that Claude Goldenberg was not a part of that. So if you hear him indicating or saying anything to the effect of countering the ELA ELD framework, he was not involved. So it's important to take a look at the research that's there and, again, use it to support and meet the needs of our culturally linguistic and diverse students.
Do you want to address the mirage of the Mississippi Miracle?
Jill, have you had a chance to?
I don't have the expertise, possibly Esteban, but yeah, we'll defer to Paul Thomas.
What I can share with you is that you want to take a look at that research and you want to identify the population of students that research is stemming from and what is actually happening in Mississippi. Because students are really being held back there. And so what impact does that have on the results of the work that has been done? Is the population of students that they use representative of the population of students that you have in your community?
Right.
Those are two key things to take a look at. I don't want to knock down the work that's been done there, but you definitely want to look at those two pieces and then make your own judgment, your own decision.
In Minnesota,
I know it doesn't meet the population of students we have in California. I can share with you that much.
they were using gain scores to make a comparison. And
Thank you.
that's the level of knowledge that people approach this with.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you for adding that, Andrew.
Yep. Let's wrap it up here. I don't want to take too much of your time. Anything else that you want to say to our good? There's about 2,700 more questions here. I can't get to everyone. I'm sorry.
Well, I know what was mentioned was that there was thoroughness in the work that we did, and yes, definitely, we would not take an opposition without making sure that we did the homework that we did, and that we shared the information that we needed to share with others to help them make the best decision possible. You know, there's no reason why we should jump into something unless it's in what's going to be in the best interest of our students. And so CABE has 50 years of standing strong on our mission and our vision, and we want to continue to do that, collaborate and work with our partners and entities that are focused on doing that. And again, we do not want to create that divisiveness or that division. But I can share with you that CABE was not invited at the table to have the conversations. CABE was not included in helping to put this bill together, because if that had happened, it would be a totally different bill. And so this is an external entity coming out of the state, influencing a small group of folks to try to create this fabricated crisis that then gave the opportunity for engaging, EL advocate organizations to come on board. And once they were on board, and once they had legislators, also they did advocacy with legislators. And once they had that, they felt they were ready to go. And that's what they've done in other states, and they've been very successful in other states. However, eventually, you're going to start to see the results unfolding. And as you start to see the results unfolding, you're going to realize we are back into that pendulum swing that has happened time and time again. And we don't want to go through that pendulum swing in California. We already have done that. We're tired. And that's the reason why we created the ELA ELD framework, because it has to be a balance of both. That divisiveness we don't need. Keep it outside of California.
All right.
Oh,
Well,
man.
let's leave it there.